from the college by the lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to a two-part series on what I would describe as oral history. We're very fortunate in this two-week series to have three guests who have lived a long time here in North Idaho, and they can tell us from their own experiences what has happened over much of the 20th century. And for our viewers who are with us now in the last few weeks from states like Wyoming and Nevada and all of Idaho and parts of Washington, Oregon, Montana, and even to Canada, we hope that you will enjoy these very wonderful stories about what has happened to really back into some of the pioneer days. As I indicated, we have three guests that have honored us with their presence today, and I would first like to welcome to the program Mr. Hap Murphy, who is 82 years young, and he and his family have been well known in this area, and his brother, the late Fred Murphy, had many, many wonderful stories and experiences, and a book was even written about his brother. Hap, it's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you.
And our second guest, we're equally very delighted to have her. Her name is Anna Fitzsimmons. Miss Fitzsimmons is 95 years young, and she's the only one of our three guests that was not born in Idaho but came here at age 6, and so after 89 years here, I think we could almost call you a native of Idaho, and it's a pleasure having you here, Anna, on our program. And our third guest is Thelma Wilson, and she is 93 years young and was born in Idaho, and I understand that Ms. Wilson is a retired school teacher, that she taught school, and we're delighted also to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have Janelle Burke as a permanent panel member, and she is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence our two-week series on the oral history of the inland Northwest.
Mr. Murphy, let's start with you. Hap, you are a native of Idaho. Where were you born here in town?
On 411 Homestead Avenue.
So you lived right almost in the city of Coeur d'Alene, but was it city in those days?
No, that was outside the city limits then.
And your father was a tugboat captain, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so did he teach you something about that as a boy?
Yes.
What kinds of things would you do?
Well, we spent a lot of time on the tug with him. They used to leave Monday morning and go up the St. Joe River and get a tow and come down. It would take from 5 to 7 days to make the trip. In the summer, my brother and I used to go with them a lot.
And you'd be taking logs, bringing logs
Yes,
back down.
for the Coeur d'Alene Mill Company.
And Anna, you moved to Coeur d'Alene as a very small child. How did you come to Coeur d'Alene?
We came by train from Minnesota.
And on the train trip here, I take it that it probably took 2 or 3 days. Is that correct?
Yes, it must have. I don't have too many memories of it, but we went to this little depot that you mentioned a little while ago, you know, that came from Spokane. And that's where we were met then and taken out to our place at Dalton Gardens.
And so were your parents involved in farming activities then? And in those days there would have been farms where Dalton Gardens is now sort of a rural living area.
They had, besides the grains and hay that the folks had, there was a 12-acre orchard also at the time, because at that time they had high hopes of having profitable fruit, which didn't last very long.
And Thelma, you were born here.
I was born here.
You were born south of town, is that correct?
Yes, out at Micah Flats. My folks came here to Idaho from Edgemont, South Dakota in 1898 because my brother, who was 3 years old, the doctors had told the folks they had to get him to the Palouse country, otherwise he would not live. He had some sort of a throat problem. So do you want to find out more about?
Well, tell me, were they farmers too?
Well, no, they weren't. They were raised in Iowa, both of them, and had run a little store for a while. And then my dad had done some carpenter work, and they knew they were going to have to come west. So they and a family by the name of Lords. There were 13 of them in the group. They left on Friday the 13th from Edgemont, and they had 13 horses. They, one of the, I think it was like a head police or something there, said, "Oh, you can't leave today, this is the 13th, wait till tomorrow." And my dad had said that 13 had always been his lucky number, so they left. And they headed west and came through the Crow Reservation. They came on the northern route because in the last years, my daughter, who lived in Wyoming for a while, was piloting trailer houses, and she went up where the big rock was that my folks turned and headed up into Montana from Wyoming. But anyhow, they came through the Crow Reservation when 3 weeks before that the Crows had stopped a train, several wagon loads, and had murdered everybody and burnt everything. But as they got onto the... You want me to go on with this?
Why don't you tell us? They had a safe passage then on Coeur d'Alene.
They had, all the time they were on the Crow Reservation, in the distance there was one crow on horseback. He had a feather in his hair and a breechcloth on and carried a rifle. And they were watched every day while they were there, never were bothered. Then they went up into Montana instead of going south because they were headed for the Recluse, but that was apparently a fairly new road that Sherman of the troop that was
in Fort
here,
Sherman, yes,
had seen about, because they camped at the foot of on 4th of July hill at the foot of the big tree.
Yes, which we know as 4th of July Pass.
Then when they got into Coeur d'Alene, they came down what I said, I don't know if it was Sherman then, it probably was, but my dad always chuckled because there were 21 saloons on Sherman. Also, there was a fellow that they considered later one of the biggest liars in the country, was always met the wagon trains, and he talked them into out at Micah, the country back in there had just been opened up for what do you
settlement,
call it?
Homesteading.
Homesteading. So my dad filed on 160 acres there, and kept it, logged it, and of course the first winter, well, by the end of the first month, the neighbors had got together and built a log house that I was born in. And at the same time, I think back, the doctor came out from Coeur d'Alene, and it cost $10 for him to come out and see that I was born. Now it costs around $2,000 at the hospital or more. So times have changed. And I had a set of parents who were really unusual. Dad had gone through the 5th grade, but he was a carpenter. He had I don't know where he got all the tools for his tool shed, but he could take a horseshoe, an old one, and shape it to fit a horse, or he could fit a new one, so he shoed horses. He cut hair. He did a little bit of everything. He farmed. Mother was the best cook out there for a number of years. She was considered the best cook, and they were two of the best parents that anybody could ever have. My dad was from a family of 7. Mother was a family of 13, and all the rest of their family were church members, but neither one of them were in Iowa. But my dad always said, when he opened the door in the morning and went out to milk the cows around 5 o'clock, he always looked up, thank God for the wonderful day. If it was snowing, it was still a wonderful day. If it was raining, thank you for the day. And we kids were taught that regardless of race, creed, or color, or anything, everybody is a human being exactly like we were, and you are to treat them exactly you want them to treat you.
On that note, I think we could say that many people today could learn a wonderful lesson from you and your family, Thelma. You have just sent a very powerful message. I would like to ask some questions to Anna and Halp. I know when we were talking on the program before we were on the air that you indicated that there's some interesting stories about education, and a lot of people may be under the wrong impression that when you were young and teenagers that not many people graduated from high school, and not as many as today. But Anna, I'll start with you. Tell us about those early years and how the grades were set up, how many grades you had.
Okay. Well, there was no school at Dalton when we first got there. And so we came on in to this central school by team and put the team up in the livery stable during the day, you see. Well, then, the way it was at Micah, then they did put a school, make a school at Dalton Gardens. So then, of course, we went to that one. And I was in those lower grades, and it was, instead of grades, it was like readers, the first reader, the second reader, and so on. And that was largely what we little folks were.
So you had several, what would today we'd have several grades would be in the same room, but you'd advance by your ability to read.
Right.
You'd be put in by.
All the grades were in that one room. And of course, when it came time to play, well, we all played together too. It was, you know.
What ages are we talking about that would be in that one schoolroom, probably?
Oh, pardon again?
What age group would it be, like from 6 years old to what?
Well, the young men were pretty husky looking, so it must have been about 15 or so.
So it's really a long range there.
Yes.
And there's one teacher teaching all of those students?
Yes.
Yes. And how many levels did you go through to graduate from what we call high school today? What different levels of reading?
Then we moved to town,
Okay.
so it was back to the city schools,
Okay.
and it was back to the central part of the time and the Lakeview school part of the time. And Lakeview was at 15th and Young, which building is
in those days, though,
there.
when you were up to what we call the high school level, did you go to different classes of the day under different subjects? Different teachers?
Different teachers in during the 8th grade. Up until that time, I had individual, you know, one teacher. But at 8th grade, we had several different teachers, and the teachers rotated rather than the classes.
Hap, let me turn to you. And in those days, too, did you ever have the one-room school? Or?
The only time I did, it was during World War I. We moved to Dover, Idaho, which is just below Sand Point. And we stayed there for about 3 years till the war was over and things. And we had a one-room school room with one teacher. It had all 8 grades in it, with a big old potbelly stove in the middle, and the kids had to keep the fires and carry the water. And
so a lot of different learnings going on in the same room at different levels. And
yeah.
A teacher had to have a lot of patience and ability to be working with people at so many different levels. What was graduation at that time? What year did one go through to have what we call the equivalent of a high school diploma?
Well, I went through Coeur d'Alene High School.
So you went through the 12?
Yeah.
In your case, Anna, was it 12 years?
Yes.
Thelma, I'd like to deal with you on some questions of education, too. Tell us about your education, and then after you got through, you became a school teacher.
Yes.
Give us that experience.
Well,
The
I
places
didn't
where
start
you
school
taught.
until I was 7 because I had to be 6 before a certain date, so I was a little late starting. But the teacher was an elderly woman, and she taught the 9th grade. My brother took the 9th grade, and I started with the 1st and ended up the 2nd year in the 4th grade.
You moved
because
fast.
there were all different sized pupils, and the teacher for 6 weeks had the ones of us that were beginners, and then she turned us over to some of the older people. In fact, Bill Barnum, the one that his granddad is the one that I spoke of at first, taught me a couple of my subjects, but then I went through the 8th grade there and came into Coeur d'Alene and took my high school there on 7th, where the school was that they destroyed. That was terrible.
After high school, then what happened
Then
next?
I went to, at that time, you had to go to Lewiston to summer school. 6 weeks, wasn't it? I think 6 weeks of summer school. So I went down to Lewiston, but I was only 17. And our test came from Boise, I think, even there. And I didn't have very good luck. I didn't really pass it, so I didn't have a certificate for teaching. But that was during the First World War, and they were so shy of teachers. And my dad knew the county superintendent, who I think's name was Egbers at that time. And Egbers told my dad, he said, if your daughter would be willing, we have a school up at Carlin Bay that we just can't get a teacher. We don't have a teacher for. So I taught up there, and those years, 9 months was the grade, or the rural school years. So I taught there my first year, and I had 15 pupils. I had one 8th grader, a girl in the 8th grade. She knew more about 8th grade work than I do. Got along beautifully. Then I taught 5 other schools, and my last year of teaching was at the Micah school that I had started in. I had 45 pupils in all 8 grades. I had 8 in the 7th grade and 7 in the 8th grade that had to go down to Meadowbrook to take the state exams that were sent out from Boise. And I've always been very proud of the fact every blessed one of them passed.
You were a good communicator.
So and our school with 45 pupils from 1st grade up through, well, I know that 2 or 3 of the 7th and 8th graders were 16 and 17 years old. There was never a sound. You could have heard a pin drop at any time. There was never any loud talking or anything. They were perfect.
Janelle Burke.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about transportation. We mentioned that earlier and how people came from one area to another, but Hap, you were a young man, and I suppose that you started out riding a lot of horses, is that correct? And of course boats were a big thing here too.
No, I was all boats.
You
no,
were on
no
the boats.
horses.
Okay, where did you like to go on the boats? What kind of boats were you using in those days?
Steam.
Steamboats.
Uh-huh.
And where were they running to?
Oh, they ran all over the lake and brought tows down from St. Mary's and St. Joe and up the Coeur d'Alene River and delivered to the mills here.
And so how many people would be on the boat, running the boat, working the boat? So
Well, the smaller tugs had 3 men, and the larger ones had 5, and the St. Joe tug it sometimes had 7 men on it.
Now we're talking about tugs as opposed to cruise boats or tourist type boats.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the working kind of boats.
Yes.
But somewhere along the line you must have had that first car. What kind of car was your first one, do you recall?
Yes. It was a Model T Ford.
And were you proud of it?
Sure. It was only about maybe half a dozen of us had cars in high school. I'd be lucky enough to have a Ford.
And so that was pretty wonderful. How old was the car? Was it a brand new one when you got it?
Oh, no. No. I think my first car, I think it cost me $45. But it ran.
And And there must have been some people in town who had some pretty spiffy automobiles.
Yes, there were a few of them. Mm-hmm.
What kind would those have been that you can recall?
Well, there were big Hudsons. Some of them had big Hudsons. And Buick was a pretty popular one, too. But I can't recall who owned them. I just remember them. But,
remember the car?
Yeah, I remember
Yes.
the cars. But I didn't have one of them.
Now, Anna, you came to town some of the time by horseback, I'm sure, and you mentioned the teams. You came to school with
Not
the team.
horseback, but then the
In the
teams.
wagon.
Mm-hmm.
And did you drive the horses, or did an older boy in the family drive the horses?
Yes, the older ones would drive. I never did.
And you kind of sat in the back,
Oh,
probably. And then, do you recall when cars first came to town, when your family first got a car?
No, I can't recall the years.
But it was, what happened in your family? Was it a big
Well-
day when you got a car?
Well, we didn't get one. We did a lot of walking in those days, and good long distances too, but that was the general thing because there were so few cars. So if we wanted to go to Fernan, we walked to Fernan. We didn't think anything about that. We'd skate in the wintertime, walk out, and summertime go to row a boat out there on it to fish. And after graduation, I too went into teaching, and so I started my first career, you might say, with that.
Did you live in a teacherage, a little house close by the school,
No,
or did you have to
I
travel to the
boarded
school?
with families.
Oh, you boarded with families,
Mhm.
and then they would see that you had transportation to the
Yes.
school.
And I went by steamboat to get my first school on the St. Joe River. And had a good family that I could board with.
So what did the roads look like in those days? Were they all wonderful four-lane highways?
No, ma'am.
Thelma, tell us a little bit about what some of the roads looked like, and Anna, feel free to kind of pop in there and
Okay.
They were
add
just
something and have
just
to.
the width of the wagons.
Yeah.
And of course, with teams, you could pass most anywhere. So when cars came along, why they had to make passes for cars. But no, my dad bought the car, the first car we had, in 1918. And then my last 2 years of high school, I stayed home and rode horseback from out there into high school.
About how long would it take you in those days to get someplace? From Micah Flats, which is south of Coeur d'Alene now, about 8 miles. It was in those days how many miles?
Well, I probably, of course, I came down the old hill at that time, and I had to be at school by 9 o'clock in the morning up on 7th Street. So I think I probably left home around 6:30 in the morning. And then Pat Broderick, that later sold cars, had a livery stable down on the corner of 2nd and Coeur d'Alene. Anyway, I left the horse there, and then I walked up to 611 Coeur d'Alene Street and changed clothes, and then walked on up to the school.
And so that's what
So
a
you
day
got plenty of walking in those days.
would be like for students. Hap, how about you? Is that about the way you remember the roads being?
Yes,
Pretty,
I remember when the
remote?
pavement ended at Harrison. From Harrison on to Spokane, onto the state line, it was just a gravel road.
Oh, yeah.
And it was often rough, and they were muddy.
And if people wanted to go to Wallace or Kellogg from Coeur d'Alene, how would they get there over toward Montana? Probably maybe on the train?
Well, you
May I cut in?
There's
Sure.
always a road.
a normal schoolmate of mine and I, graduating there in 22, decided that it would be a nice jaunt to go up to walk up to Wallace. Now put yourself back in those roads and those conditions and us kids. Well, anyway, we started out, and we had a schoolmate living in Wallace, so we were going to visit her. And it was like seeing her the next day. Well, we didn't get there that easy. We got picked up for short pickups here and there, and we were dusty and hot and all that, and so dirty that we were a little bit ashamed to go into my friends looking that way. So we took spend the night there in a hotel room and saw him in the morning. But that just goes to show you how much we knew about the country at that time.
How did you get from here to Sandpoint, from Coeur d'Alene to Sandpoint? Was it 2-lane road at all, or pretty dusty?
It was dusty and gravel, and we made the trip many times during World War I in a 1912 model Ford. But it was the worst times was early spring, and then you could get mired down.
In the mud,
yes,
from the rain.
And, there used to be a water tank at Granite, and we'd have to stop there and water the whole thing up because we always boil the radiator. I don't know why, but we'd stop there and get water. And I remember that water tank right along the road, and from then on it was real muddy for a ways.
How long did it take to drive from here to Spokane?
To Spokane? Oh, I don't remember doing it in the Ford, but then we got a Saxon car, and Dad would brag about making it the trip in 2 hours or 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Fast driver.
Yeah.
Oh. From Coeur d'Alene to Spokane, which is a distance of about 30 miles today.
Part of the jet set. Well, all of you have been very wonderful, and I've been given the signal that we're out of time. But the good news for our viewers is that we're going to have you back next week, and we thank you for coming back next week to continue our discussion on oral history of the Inland Northwest. And for our viewers, I'd like to let you know that we're going to talk about some personalities on that show, some people they have known that had some real interesting history in their own right. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station. From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Welcome to part 2 of our programs on oral history of the Inland Northwest. This is the second and final week of this series, and for you who were not with us last week, we had a wonderful time with 3 guests who can certainly sit here today and testify to what life was like going back many, many years here into Idaho and this inland area. I first of all welcome to the program Hap Murphy, who is 82 years young, and as he did last week, he will continue this week to tell us some stories, particularly about transportation, other issues that deal with our people in the past and up to the present time. Hap, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you for a second week.
Thank you.
And next to Mr. Murphy is Ann Fitzsimmons, who is 95 years young, and She too was with us last week, and we're delighted to have her back. And among other things that she has done in all those wonderful years, has been a teacher, and she shared some of those stories with us last week. And she's only one of our 3 guests that was not born in Idaho. She came here at the young age of 6 and has been here now for 89 years. And Miss Fitzsimmons, it's a pleasure to have you on the program once again.
Thank you.
And our 3rd guest is Thelma Wilson, and she is 93 years young. And Miss Wilson also was a school teacher and did many other things as her family did. And she has many more stories to share with us again this week. And Miss Wilson, it's a pleasure to have you back again for a 2nd time.
Thank you.
And as always, it's my pleasure to welcome Janelle Burke, who is a regular panelist on the program and an attorney in the state of Idaho. And I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning of our 3 guests at this time.
Mr. Murphy, there were some wonderful days and some wonderful times, I'm sure. What did people do for entertainment when you were a boy? What kinds of things did you really like to do?
Well, we were in sports, and we swam, and we could go to the show for a dime.
Yes, the movies came.
The movies were there, and I think, if I remember correctly, every Friday night they had a vaudeville, and the whole family would go. The vaudeville show, and then we played games.
A lot of parlor games.
Yes, and
Chinese checkers, I suppose, and
yes, and regular checkers and chess, and card games. Any kind of a game you can think of.
So, if you wanted to show a young lady a really good time, what kinds of things would you do when you were dating?
Well, I'd take her to the show, and then afterwards I'd buy her a milkshake or an ice cream soda. And it would cost me over 4 bits for the whole works, you know.
So you'd have a good time doing that. And did you like to dance? Or dance is a big thing
Yes,
nowadays.
we never missed a dance.
Who generally sponsored the dances? Would you go to an organizations like the Elks, perhaps, or someone like that?
Well, there used to be a dance up there where the Vets Club is now. It was Knights of Columbus, I believe it was. They did run it as a business. There was the old Wrights Hall was over there on 2nd Street, and there were dances all over town, really. We'd go to Rastum a lot, to dances.
How'd you get in touch with the young lady? Did you just pick up the telephone and call her up?
Well, we didn't have a telephone. Well, the best way to do it was go to the dance and stand there, and if she looked at you twice, you asked her for a dance.
So that's how it was in those days. Well, Anna, what are some of the fun things that you remember doing? What kinds of things did your family like to do?
Well, as a family group, when we'd have birthday celebrations or that type of thing, we played parlor games too. Ring on the String and Poor Pussy. You've missed out on a good game if you've never played that. And then for individual things, there were card games too, Flinch and Tiddlywinks and various other games. But
what about some activities that you might do? Like, did you picnic during the summer and perhaps skate during the winter?
Well,
what kinds of
the
things?
park was such an important thing to us because I don't think there were any playgrounds except at the schools. And so that park was just important. On Sundays, they always had a good concert, a good band concert. We made it a point to go as often as we could, just sit on the grass and enjoy that. And we loved dancing, so just as you mentioned those different halls, yes, I know where they are. We used to go to them. And we thought that if there was a dance at the Masonic Temple, that was special. And so we tried to make a real holiday out of that, just because it was the building, I think, rather than anything else.
And it was a grand building in those days.
Yes. And then, of course, we just, as I said, we did a lot of walking. Not for any special destination like that Wallace thing, but just to get out and go.
Thelma, how about you? What kinds of things did you like to do and your family like to do?
Well, we did a lot of picnicking, and my sister raised quite a family. She had Well, they had 10 to begin with and lost one, so there were 9 nieces and nephews, and so holidays we always were together then, but otherwise, there was always dances. My brother was in the First World War, and he was in France for around a year and a half, I think, and when he came back, we did a lot of going together. In my teaching, I bought a Chevrolet Roadster and used it the last couple of years when I was teaching, and had it after we was married. But no, there was always, we did a lot of just picnicking, traveling around.
Now, before I go to Tony, I'd like to ask you a question about people coming to Coeur d'Alene to spend the weekend, perhaps, from Spokane. I understand that many years ago there was a train that ran from Spokane to Coeur d'Alene, and what would they do once they got off the train?
They spent a lot of time in the park, but many of them would take the boat excursion. We'd go up the St. Joe River and come back, and it was an electric train. They come in just loaded, and they'd just pile on that old flyer, and up the lake they'd go, and they had a big time. It was very, very popular.
And some also would have gone to Hayden Lake. What is now the Hayden Lake Country Club would have in those days been a Great Northern Depot, is that correct? Or do you recall the name of it?
No, just the electric line.
It was the electric line.
Yeah, that ended it right there at the...
So they could go there as well.
Yes.
To spend some time. And they would swim, I take it, and picnic and do other kinds of things. And there was there an amusement park as well on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene, or did that come later?
That came much later.
After World War II?
Yes.
Or along in that time?
Thelma, you and I were talking before we did the show, and I was really intrigued, and I told our viewers today we would get involved in this. There's been some interesting personalities in our history here, as there is anywhere in the world, and I believe when you were growing up, one of your good friends, I guess it was your friend's grandfather that was very involved. I want you to tell us the story of the gentleman who was one of the men who was responsible for the arrest of John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Lincoln. Would you tell us that story?
Well, he used to, the Barnum brothers had a big yard out there, and several 4th of Julys, they invited half of the Coeur d'Alene, it seemed like, and be out there. And Grandpa Barnum would tell about hunting for this John Wilkes Booth and getting him. But otherwise, you see, that was when I was, from the time I was around 6 years old up till, I don't remember when they lost him, but probably when I was in high school.
And so different
occasions.
To
me, it seems so interesting, the fact that he's buried here in our Forest Cemetery, and I don't think anybody in Coeur d'Alene really knows it.
When he was with the other men and was looking for John Wilkes Booth, was he an officer, was he?
He was an officer, and I really don't, that's one thing that one of the Jacots girls with her dad. He was a relative of her, or her dad was a relative of his, and she is trying to find out. She has written back east to see what she can find out.
What was the gentleman's name again, the officer that helped arrest Mr. Booth?
William Barnum.
William Barnum. And he's the one that's buried here in Coeur d'Alene.
And it was his 2 sons that homesteaded up there at Micah, where the Carneys, I think Laura Carney works here at the college, doesn't she?
Let me ask a couple of other people a couple of questions in this area. Again, while we were off the air before we taped this second program, we were talking some about young people today and how difficult it is for a lot of them to get work when they graduate from college. You know, our whole economy's changed. Hap, when you finished school, and actually all 3 of you can address this, there was always something available for you. You didn't have to worry about finding a job. Is that correct?
There's lots of work, but you couldn't get paid for it. To get a paying job, it was pretty difficult.
or very, very low wages? What were wages when you say were getting out of high school from some jobs?
I worked harvesting the hay at the head of Hayden Lake. We worked 10 hours a day, and we got $2 for 10 hours work. And the same guy that hired me also did threshing, wheat threshing, and he threshed up on the sunny side. And we finished the threshing job, and we're sitting around waiting to get paid, and the farmer come out and says, "Boys, I'm sorry, I don't have any money. I'm going to have to pay you off in wheat."
Uh-oh.
So I took the wheat home and gave it to my dad for his chickens.
So a lot of times it wasn't in cash, it was in some kind of product.
Well, there wasn't any money. Nobody had any money. He couldn't sell his wheat, so he couldn't pay us.
Anna, when you were a young woman and you were teaching and so forth, again, would you have the same kind of experience, and what kind of pay did you get in those days?
Well, it was a 7-month school that I had, and I thought that was wonderful because it was the first job, you see. And what did I get paid? I'm not sure. But out of that pay went, besides the board, you know, where I was staying, money for war bonds and war stamps. And we were working real hard on that and trying to go with the Red Cross and all these organizations that were working for the good of the war, you see, the war effort. And that was the year that the flu, what did they call it? Yes, the flu, wasn't it? That was so bad. And
was that in about 1917? 1918.
And it closed the schools, you see. So I was up there on the river and wanted to come home. And the trustees doubted that I should because they were that kind of a group. But I asked the county superintendent, a young lady that was helpful to me, and she said I could go home, but just tell them that, okay, I could go home, which I did. Well, then that cut the term down shorter yet, you see, so, but all in all, as I said, I was happy with it because it was my first job. And I had help about getting the school fire started and the schoolroom floor swept and things like that, which I wasn't always lucky enough to do that in the other schools that I was in.
So that was a benefit to you. Thelma, could you tell us about your early work and the kind of pay that you received?
Well, I think, you see, I started the school up at Carlin Bay when I was only 17 yet. But I think I got $70 or $75 a month. And then I paid $12 a month for board at the Capels that lived up there. But as near as I can remember, I don't think I ever got more than $90 a month any time for the school.
So would you agree with Hap that one could get work, but a lot of times it was difficult to get paid?
No, never had any trouble getting paid. I always...
a different era.
Yeah. The county superintendent was in the building on the corner of 5th and Sherman, and it was upstairs. And all I had to do was go up there, and I can't remember that I even had to hand anything in, did we? To get our pay? It just seemed like that was it. We were paid every month.
Janelle Burke.
I want to ask you a little bit about the houses, the homes that you lived in at that time. Hap, you lived in Coeur d'Alene. Did you live in a grand house, and what kinds of appliances did you have in that house?
Well, we started out with a 3-room house, and then Dad made an 8-room house out of it. And the only appliance we had for a long time was Dad bought Mother a washing machine. It was a Savage washing machine. It was a spin dryer. Electric.
And that must have been a wonderful thing to her.
You know, it was a great thing, and the neighbors used to come over and watch the thing work, you know. The washing water power sold them. That's where we got it, from the water power.
Well, Anna, how about you? What kinds of homes did you live in? Was there indoor plumbing, that
No.
sort of thing?
No. My brothers used to plan to scare my sister and me of an evening, you know. We had to go out before going to bed. And we'd make such a deal out of it. They had time for the boys to get out, you see, and work up their plan. So they'd be around the corner somewhere to scare us, jumping out and scaring us. But the house was middle class, I'd call it, just ordinary rural home. And
wall-to-wall carpet?
Heavens no.
Area rugs on probably pretty rough wood floors, is that correct?
Well, I don't even remember that, but the braided rugs that they always made, you know, in the country homes. And
did you have wallpaper?
yes,
You wallpapered and you ordered that from Sears?
Oh,
perhaps?
yes, through the catalog.
Was the Saturday night bath legendary, Thelma? Was that a true
absolutely.
thing? Or did people bathe
Absolutely.
every day as they do today?
In a wash tub.
In a
Oh,
wash
yes.
tub and with heated water, heated on the stove?
Well, Mom's kitchen range had a
Reservoir.
reservoir. Yeah, gee, I couldn't remember the name. And it was about so long and about so deep, and that they always kept that full of water, hot water. And so I'd have hot water. But otherwise, they didn't have, well, I think, in later years they had Delco lights before, and then my brother was the one that helped get the REA electric lines in the country.
So, did all three of you sit in the dark initially, originally? Did you use lanterns at your house, Hap, or was there always electricity where you were living?
No,
You
we
were
didn't
pretty
always
much in
have
town.
electricity. We had Aladdin lamps and Coleman lamps and kerosene lamps.
Yeah.
And you remember that too,
Yes.
Anna. That's what
Oh,
you were
yes.
using as well, all three of you.
And then from the Delco, we were able to have one drop light, you know, in about the center of the rooms. And it was weak enough that if, when we went to supper and turned down the light over the supper table, we turned out the light in the next room, you see, so that we had enough juice to make light for us to see what we were eating.
And you listened to the radio. The radio came a little bit later?
Oh, yes. Yes, my dad loved that because he loved music, and there was music on it. And I think altogether they probably had 3 different ones.
Battery radios
If
at
he'd
first?
only have lived to have seen TV, that would have been wonderful.
Battery radios
Yes,
at
batteries.
first?
yes.
Yeah.
And the signal came from where? Where was
Our
the,
first one was San Francisco. And then later they got the Spokane station.
I've already asked Thelma earlier about someone that she had met who had a role to play in history by the arrest of John Wilkes Booth. I'd like to ask you first, Anna, and then Hap, through all the years you've lived and the people you've met and the people who've come through and lived here, can you give us a story about someone you describe in quotes, personality, a really interesting individual that you found quite different from most people?
You kind of threw that at
Yeah, I
me.
threw it at you, didn't I? Yes. Hap, would you like to start while Anna's thinking about that? We'll come back to her.
Well, this fellow was a character, and I worked for him for many years. It was A.B. Lafferty. I don't think there was anybody in the world like A.B. Lafferty. He did everything.
Give us a little example or two of what he was like.
Well, he was a heavy drinker. And you couldn't depend on what he was going to do. One time, he and a fellow named John Carey made a bet that his boat could outpull the other one. And these were just little runabouts, see. So they had a tug of war down at the boat, down at the city dock. And Lafferty, being in the tugboat business, you'd think he would have known better, but he took his boat out. It was had a great big Kermit engine in it, and he put a big propeller on it. He should have had a small propeller to get the jump. Well, Terry's boat was the quickest, and it pulled him backwards. And the one that lost was supposed to jump in the lake, and it was early spring. So Lafferty was afraid to do it. So he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send all the kids in Coeur d'Alene to the show, free. And there was a Dream and the Liberty, 2 theaters. And Lafferty told me later how much that cost him.
Oh.
And then another time, he pulled the same kind of a deal. He bought the prime beef at the fair.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going to have a barbecue, and they had it up over here where the parking lot is now, the big parking lot. And he thought maybe 100 or 200 people would show up. There was thousands of people came.
In those days.
Yeah, and they had one of the bakeries roasted the meat, and it went just like that, you know. So a half a dozen have scoured the whole town for hot dogs, for anything we could feed those people. But I think we got them fed. I don't remember anybody went away hungry, but he filled the whole town up with people. Just that, he'd do things like that.
Very colorful figure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anna, that you've had a little time to think about that?
I can't come up with anyone like
that.
that.
Let me ask you something like this. Earlier on the first show you mentioned, I believe it was you, that as you came down Sherman in those early days, there was something like 17 or 19 bars. Is that correct?
Oh,
you told 21 bars.
Thelma, tell us about that.
Well, that's all I know about it. My dad was not a drinking person.
But it sounds like that there was a lot more bars per population than now.
The Fort Sherman was, I don't know how many men they had down there at that time, where this is. And
for our viewers, I'll say that Fort Sherman was located where North Idaho College is now.
Yeah. So they probably took advantage of it. But no, years ago there was a lot of drinking as far as that goes. I know at the dances that we always went to, there was always had liquor outside, but there was never had it inside. And they were able to make it around the floor.
In addition to...
But it wasn't wild like it is now.
They were more calm with their drinking?
They were, well, one thing that I miss, and this sounds crazy, I know, but my family thinks I'm a little strange at times. I miss the fact that men wore hats and tipped their hats to women. That I always admired.
Another issue that you probably have experienced, of course, there's been periods in our history where things were legal, illegal. Gambling was legal at a point in Coeur d'Alene, and a lot of people came here. Which one of you would like to tell us something about that period of time and what that was like?
That was before my time.
Okay, Thelma, you can remember that. Why don't you share that with us?
Well, I know there was because the Raricks, who is Tim's grandparents that we were so well acquainted with, that Tim that works here. But anyhow, Bob Rarick always was down at the Eagles on weekends playing cards, and of course we knew that there was gambling kind of somewhere in there. Now whether a good Eagle would tell you that there wasn't, but then my husband went through the Eagle chairs at one time completely. And but it wasn't like it is now. I open the paper in the morning, the press, and all I read are headlines at first. Why all of the dirty work that's going on? It's terrible. We didn't have schools for having such a time. In those days, it seems as though the parents, when they sent their kids to school, I know this is what we heard at home, you know, when you get to school, you act like you know how to act. No, carrying on. But this Grandpa Barnum always came the first day of school out at Micah, and that was one thing he mentioned, that they were to school to learn things, and they were to act like they should. So we never had trouble at school. I live up at 1114 B Street, and When I moved in there 20 years ago, the family that lived beside me had a girl that was about 10 years old and 2 boys that were around 6 and 7. Well, the girl went to Winton School. She came home one day and she was furious. She had told the teacher that her mom and dad would have the police up there to settle things. Well, that I just couldn't believe. Well, her mom and dad even went up, and to me that is stupid. The mom and dad were the ones that should have had the girls settled, not the police, or not them having to go up to school. I never had a parent come to school to see if the kids were all right, because I never had trouble.
Also, I hear you saying that parents supported the teachers and they worked together on discipline and
absolutely
those kind of things. Well, I get the word that we're just about out of time, and on behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, I want to thank Thelma Wilson, Anna Fitzsimmons, and Hap Murphy for these 2 weeks that you spent with us. And you go back with wonderful stories and experiences, and we were delighted to be able to get this on tape and to share it with our viewers. And we want to wish you well, and once again thank you for giving us such a very special time on this program. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you have enjoyed this 2-week series, and I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to be with us again for the series the next few weeks, which will be on universal health care and health care issues. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.